Dere, and welcome to the fifth video in the series History Lessons with RedWineLover17. In the last video I introduced you to the British Tier 4 cruiser HMS Emerald. We are now on to Tier 5 and today we are looking at the light cruiser HMS Leander. The ship is named after the figure from Greek mythology and is the fifth ship of this name. In 1961 there was another HMS Leander, but this time it was a frigate instead of a light cruiser. Today, however, we are discussing the light cruiser HMS Leander, or actually HMNZS Leander. What does the NZ in between stand for? Correct, New Zealand, because the ship was leased to New Zealand in 1937. The keel laying of the Leander class light cruiser took place on 24th September 1931, and she was first commissioned under the British flag on 24th March 1933. The Leander class consisted of 8 light cruisers named after mythological figures such as Orion — the ship had nothing to do with the Legends battleship Orion — Ajax or Achilles. Most of the Leander class was lent to New Zealand, India and Australia. The namesake ship of the class, our HMS Leander, as I said, went to New Zealand. The whole class was influenced by the York-class heavy cruisers to better protect merchant convoys. This is evidenced, for example, by the relatively strong armament with her 8x2 152mm main battery, 4 single 102mm anti-aircraft guns, 12x 12.7mm machine guns, and 2 quadruple 533mm torpedo tubes. The in-game armament has been reduced here, so the Leander on Tier 5 has only half the main battery guns, but slightly more powerful AA. The 169.1 meter long and 17 meter wide ship with a draught of 5.8 meters managed to reach 32.5 knots, i.e. 60 kilometers per hour. This value also corresponds to the in-game speed. The Leander, which had room for 570 people, was thus hired by New Zealand in April 1937, as already mentioned, and carried out an aerial survey on the islands of Henderson, Oeno and Ducie during its voyage from Europe to New Zealand. On each of the 3 islands, the ship placed a British flag and an additional plaque stating that the island belonged to His Royal Highness King George VI. During the Second World War, the ship initially served in the Pacific and Indian Oceans, and on 27th February 1941, under Commander Robert Bevan, was able to hold her own in a battle for the first time. Around 10:30 in the morning, the Leander noticed the silhouette of a ship near the Maldives. So the Leander increased her speed to get closer to the ship, which resembled an Italian Ramp-class fruit freighter. When the Leander was still about 3 kilometers away, the crew spotted a gun on the forecastle, whereupon the sailors manned battle stations at 11:15. When asked to identify herself, the alleged freighter hoisted a British merchant flag and transmitted 4 signal digits, but these were not in the British signal book. The Leander ordered the other ship to stop all engines immediately, but this went unanswered. So, a few minutes later, the ship hoisted the Italian merchant flag and aimed her guns at the Leander. The Leander stood broadside to the Italian ship, named Ramp 1, by the way, and would have been an easy target for its guns and torpedoes had it been a regular warship. You just do not show broadside. In any case, the Ramp 1 opened her inaccurate fire at 11:53, which was answered with gunfire by the Leander after 30 seconds. It is believed that the Ramp 1 fired only about 3 shells per gun, of which only single splinters hit the Leander. The Leander, on the other hand, fired 5 complete salvos in 1 minute before ceasing fire to survey the result and checking with the Ramp 1 to see if it surrendered. The Leander could record several hits on the forward part of the ship and the fire inside could be made out through a large gaping hole. The Italian auxiliary cruiser then took down the flag and began evacuating the ship. One Italian sailor died as a result of the Leander's fire. However, the captain, 10 officers and 91 sailors were saved. Only one additional sailor succumbed to his severe injuries a little later. The prisoners were placed in the care of the oil tanker Pearleaf at Adu Atoll the next day, which took them to Colombo on Sri Lanka. On 23 March 1941, the Leander intercepted the French Vichy government merchant ship Charles Elde in the Indian Ocean between Mauritius and Madagascar and shifted to the Persian Gulf for a month as a support ship to the aircraft carrier Hermes and the light cruiser Emerald, both known from World of Warships legends. She then went to the Mediterranean for 3 months to fight the Vichy government during the Syria-Lebanon campaign, where she rescued the British destroyer HMS Janus from the French destroyers Valmy and Gepard at the battle on the Litany River, forcing the 2 destroyers to surrender. Incidentally, this was also the Gepard known from the game. The Leander's biggest and most significant battle was to follow on the night of 12th to 13th July 1943, when she, along with the 2 American light cruisers Honolulu and St. Louis, not the St. Louis from the game, and 10 American destroyers faced a Japanese light cruiser, 5 destroyers and 4 transport destroyers at the Battle of Kolombangara in the Solomon Islands. The Japanese convoy, which included the ship Yukikaze, was attempting to bring reinforcements to Villar on the south coast of Kolombangara to stop the Allied New Georgia campaign. At 0100 hours, the Allied ships first made radar contact, and the commander of Task Group 36.1, Rear Admiral Walton Lee Ainsworth, was under the mistaken impression that he could surprise the Japanese ships. However, the latter knew of the task group's presence 2 hours earlier, because they deployed a receiver that could pick up the American radar's electrical impulses before they even came within its range. So the American destroyers increased their speed to attack the Japanese, while the cruisers moved into position to bring all their main guns to bear. It should have been a swift and devastating blow. However, by this time the Japanese had already fired their torpedoes and were sailing away, apart from the Chinzu. The Chinzu, with the Japanese commander Admiral Isaki on board, was allowed to be the pawn, attacked the Allies, and was completely shot up by the concentrated fire of the 13 ships, suffered more torpedo hits, broke in 2 and sank at 04:45 with almost the entire crew and Admiral Isaki. In the meantime, a Japanese torpedo hit the Leander, damaging her so badly that she could not take any further part in the battle. She was covered and escorted by the destroyers Radford and Jenkins. One of the sailors who lost his life on the Leander was Savinaka Naulumatua from Fiji. In his honor, Fiji commissioned the patrol boat RFNS Savinaka in 2020. But this is only a brief digression, as the battle was thus over for the Leander. However, I do not want to withhold the rest from you, of course, as the matter is interesting on the one hand, and on the other hand shows why one victory is enough and one does not have to win even harder. In any case, Rear Admiral Ainsworth could now have ended the battle and returned as the clear victor. After all, he had pushed back the Japanese ships and sunk the commander of the Japanese ships along with his crew without suffering any major losses himself. But Ainsworth's thirst for recognition and his wounded pride over the unsuccessful surprise attack did not allow this, and he wanted to get out even better and ordered the pursuit of the Japanese ships. The cruiser Honolulu had radar contact with a group of ships at 1:56, but since Ainsworth was not sure where his destroyers Radford and Jenkins, which were accompanying the Leander, were, it took him a few minutes to determine their positions before he finally gave the order to fire. In the meantime, the Japanese destroyers had fired more torpedoes and hit the St. Louis and the Honolulu even before they had aligned their guns and fired. The destroyer Gwyn also suffered a hit amidships and was sunk the next morning. Only the Ralph Talbot managed to launch a few untargeted torpedoes in this engagement, but they were ineffective. So, with the exception of the Chinzu, which had drawn Allied fire, all the Japanese ships escaped and the transport destroyers could land their 1,200 army men on Villars as planned. The American Gwin, on the other hand, was completely sunk. The Honolulu and St. Louis took several months to repair, and the Leander was even out of action for a whole year and was not used by New Zealand after that. The Leander thus made her comeback to the Royal Navy on 27th August 1945 and was then still involved in the second Corfu Channel incident. On 22nd October 1946, the two British cruisers Leander and Mauritius, together with the destroyers Saumarez and Volage, passed through the Corfu Strait to test the Albanian Navy, which was increasingly siding with the Soviets in the incipient Cold War. The four ships thus passed close to the Albanian coast in a zone that was actually considered to be free of mines. HMS Mauritius led the convoy. Behind her the Saumarez, Leander and Volage. Then, at 14:53, the destroyer Saumarez ran into a mine near Saranda Bay and was badly damaged amidships under the bridge. The Volage, behind, was thus given the task of towing the damaged ship into the port of Corfu. At 16:31, however, the Volage also ran into a mine, resulting in her bow being completely blown away. A total of 44 people died and 42 others were injured in the two detonations. 4 years later, the Leander met her end when she was scrapped in 1950. And so, our video on HMS Leander comes to an end as well. If you liked the video, please subscribe to our channel and give us a like. We'll be back with more gameplay videos soon, of course, and the next ship in the line, the Tier 6 light cruiser Fiji, is already waiting in the wings. See you soon, and dere.